welcome and thanks for joining us at Funeral Innovations, Trends, Tips, and Technology. In these videos, we chat with industry leaders to discuss marketing trends, technology tips, and just in general how people are making their funeral homes serve their families better. I'm Heather. I'm the Director of Marketing at Funeral Innovations.
And I'm Joey. I'm the Marketing and Design Coordinator at Funeral Innovations.
And today our guests are Brian Waters from Waters and Pittman Richmond Funeral Home and Ryan Ballard from Ballard and Sons Funeral Home and Cremation Services. Hi, guys.
Hey, what is up?
Hey, so to start off with, why don't you each just tell us a little bit about your businesses, and also you guys are the hosts of Undertaking the podcast. Tell us a little bit about what that is too.
Okay, yeah. I've been a licensed funeral director since 2005. I graduated from Vincennes University and became a licensed funeral director and embalmer here in the state of Indiana. And I work for frankly, my mother and father at our two small rural funeral homes. And yeah, so I get to wear all the hats. Not only am I a funeral director and embalmer, and I would do the social media, I do the yard maintenance and technical support. There's all different kind of hats in a small town funeral home. So yeah, that's my role. Ryan?
I'm Ryan Ballard. I'm just 3 years in as a funeral director. I came from a previous career as a paramedic, still currently a paramedic, just not really practicing from a clinical standpoint. I also am with a family funeral home. I've been told many times I'm the son on the sign. I'm not the Ballard on the sign. So my father likes to make sure to point that out time and time again when we battle back and forth, and it does happen, family business. But no, it's been a great time. I'm a little bit of everything, as Brian said too. We call it kind of the gopher. Today I was mowing yards. I'm an embalmer. I'm a funeral director. I'm a lawn care guy. I'm also the guy that dusts. I'm also the guy that does a lot of things that my bosses don't want to do. So it is just smile and we just keep chugging along,
And did you say where you're located, Ryan?
We've got two facilities, one in Delaware County in a small town called Daleville, and then another rural community in Middletown, Indiana. So both in Indiana.
Okay, kind of outside of Indianapolis or between Indy and...
We're about 50 minutes northeast, Brian. Would that be, you're more of an hour and 20 minutes, aren't you?
Yeah, we're right in between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis, just off of I-69 in rural Delaware County.
Yeah, it takes about 50 minutes for me to get to downtown Indianapolis.
Okay, gotcha. And tell us what Undertaking the podcast is.
Go for it, Brian.
Well, Undertaking the podcast was just a hobby that Ryan and I decided to start in 2018. We met each other on a trip to York, Pennsylvania to Matthews Aurora Casket Company out there. And Ryan was still in school. I was, practicing funeral director and embalmer, and we just struck up a friendship and really kind of networked back and forth, over the last, several years. Before the brainchild behind this was really Ryan. He said, "Hey, let's start a podcast." And without really asking much, I started buying equipment and figuring it out. So we launched Undertaking the podcast in September, October of 2018. And we wanted to set it up as an opportunity for folks to just expand conversation within funeral service, because we know when we go to conventions, some of the best learning that we can do is sit with some of the seasoned funeral directors and just listen to them tell stories. And the idea was like, well, why don't we just record those and put them out to everybody? And that's really where the podcast started, and it has morphed and changed and added to since that time in 2018. And it's something that it was kind of a rocket that we didn't know we were really attached to, and we're just trying to hang on to it as it goes.
Well, and we've talked about too, if we knew what we were getting into, I don't know that it would have necessarily started. The amount of evenings that Brian and I spend not only on the phone, podcasting, talking, coming up with different show topics, things like that. There's a lot more that goes into it than I think what we've grown to just love it, to be honest with you, because we're getting better with this. And as Brian said, when it comes to the story, everybody has that story. It's unique to every different person. We just had one on that was a donation story, or actually not a donation story. It's the idea of someone actually having a gift of life given to them through donation. And, it's not necessarily all about funeral service. It's sometimes about things maybe we're dealing with within funeral service, but there's a storyline there. Donation's a big thing within funeral service that we have to deal with. And we like to highlight it in a good way. So that was something that kind of came up. We've got stories too when it comes to people losing children. We've talked about people with some mental illness. We've had the chance to talk to. So very much, as Brian says, it morphs into just a plethora of different pathways, and we just continue to go down each and every path.
So then could you kind of talk about your listenership a little bit more? Is it mostly made up of funeral directors or non-industry people? And does that affect the way you brainstorm topics for what you guys will talk about at all? Because I know you say you've got this like wide range of topics, but does your listenership affect that at all?
The quick answer is yes. When we first started, I guess when you start any sort of project, you got to have a target. And our quick target market was those in funeral service, whether you're a funeral director, an embalmer, or just work in some capacity within funeral service. So that's who we really wanted to put the podcast out for initially. But we always had in the back of the mind that we wanted other people to listen to conversations of funeral directors and embalmers, because there's this stigma that a funeral director is an old, tall, white guy that has no sense of humor. And that's one of the things that these stories bring forward, is that we're just regular people, and we got a sense of humor. We've got hobbies. I mean, we just talked to someone the other day that makes maple syrup, taps the trees, and a funeral director. There's so many of these neat stories that we wanted to learn and put out. So our listenership has actually grown to be more so people with an interest in what we do. And so although it is still heavy within the funeral service side, that the listenership has grown so much that it just blows us away that people are listening to us, that English is not even their primary language. I mean, when it went worldwide, we're going, wait a second, is this for real? So yeah, it's hard to gauge exactly the numbers. We can tell where you're listening from, but we can kind of gauge from the interaction that we get from our listeners through our social media channels of what kind of the ratios would be. And it's around 50-50, and it could swing either way.
Well, and I think to touch on that, we are people just like anybody else, Brian. We talked about that. People, always, we want to kind of bring the curtain behind, take the curtain away from funeral service a little bit and bring people into what it is we do, what it is we're talking about, our conversations. But I think the Addams family always comes to mind when it comes to funeral service. Lurch in the corner, dealing with his sleeves, tall black coat, black tie, very pale. That's not all of us. I mean, Brian and I have great tans. Beautiful beards. I mean, we're just normal people. And I think that's something too that sometimes gets a little mixed up in the conversation, that, it is a different type of job, no question about it. But there are some normal individuals that do this. I'd say more so than not. And even if you're not, hey, all kinds of kinds, right? Or whatever it is.
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that, because, we run marketing campaigns for a lot of our clients. And one of the most popular marketing campaigns we've had in the past is a day in the life of a funeral director, where we just send an email series that kind of talks about what their day-to-day life is. And that was a big hit. The funeral director's like, nobody's going to want to read this. Everybody wanted to read it. It was very popular because people do want to know. And I think they do have a lot of misconceptions. And I love that you guys are getting that message out there. So tell us a little bit about a few of your most memorable interviews, or interviews that you've done that it went in a totally different direction, or were really enlightening for you.
Ryan, take it away.
Jack Lechner, when he talks about Arlington National Cemetery, is one of my favorite, just because of the history. He actually runs a mortuary school over there in Cincinnati, but also ran Arlington National Cemetery for a few years. I can't remember. You'll have to go back and listen to it, but it was a few years. The history that guy can throw out is just unbelievable. The stories behind, some of the individuals that are buried there. I thought that was absolutely it was crazy to me. I loved it. My mom and dad, they of course they said that was the best podcast we've had so far. I think our 150th episode was pretty good. I think Larry Stewart Jr. Was exceptional. You've got Dominic Astorino. Vernie Fountain's a good one. Brian?
Our most personal episode is just Ryan and I together talking about is our first episode we did on Thanksgiving. And Ryan had recently lost his grandmother, and my wife and I had lost an unborn baby. So we had a miscarriage. So Ryan and I expressed how we were feeling on that podcast. So that was probably the most, heartfelt, hit home type of episode. For me, I was floored when Thomas Lynch responded to an email with a cell phone number, because I've been a student of Thomas Lynch as a funeral director, read everything that he writes and watched everything that he does. And
tell us who Thomas Lynch is.
Thomas Lynch is the author of The Undertaking and The Good Funeral. And there's a Frontline documentary through PBS called The Undertaking, which you'll never make it through with a dry eye. And, when I reached out to Thomas Lynch and he said, yeah, I'd absolutely love to be on the podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
There's been so many constant surprises. We just keep getting surprised along the way. And, Ryan had listed off a lot of those really good episodes and those people that have supported us by being willing to share their stories.
So it sounds like, and obviously all these interviews have had a huge impact on you guys. And as your viewership grows and as you've seen that growth, can you talk about has your podcast impacted funeral homes at all in that way?
I'll say this, Brian, I'll have to probably reel me in here for a minute, but, I don't know that it's impacted funeral homes from a standpoint of profitability or anything like that, because we don't talk about that. I don't care if your funeral home's profitable. That's not my with you. We just want to talk about funeral service. I think it's opened up dialogue with people, and I think people now feel that it's okay to talk about certain things. We always go back to organ donation and how there's always a little bit of a battle between funeral directors and those procurement organizations all across the United States. Some better than some better in some areas and some not, and it just depends. But I think it opens up the dialogue. We've had the opportunity to talk to people that have been victims, of suicide. And what I mean by that, families have been victims of suicide. I think that brings a little bit more of a realization to the funeral director as to how to talk to these families in that situation. We've actually talked about the idea of where they went and how they went throughout the funeral process, what they were feeling, what they were doing. So, like I said, this isn't a podcast to make your funeral home profitable. It honestly has nothing to do with that. That's on you. This is for, I think, the directors and the public to just listen to real stories about real people and what they've gone through in a time of tragedy and sometimes not tragedy. We've interviewed a lot of different people. You guys will have to go back and look, but we've interviewed a lot of different people, and you'll feel it in the podcast. You'll feel those awkward moments, those pauses. Brian and I have them, it's just real, and I think people like that. So from a standpoint of ability, what's this, the third time I'm saying it? Yeah, it's not we just want to talk and create the dialogue and let people know it's okay to have dialogue.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, for me, the quick answer is maybe. There's nothing that we're going to do to change the world here. We've had listeners, send us messages about a certain episode. Thank you for letting someone know about that company. And all we did was interview the company, and we wanted to learn about what they did, and we put it out to the world. Next thing you know, that company's calling us up, going, "Hey, thanks for doing that podcast. We've had 5 people contact us that want to use our services," which it was one of those things that still kind of surprised me. And the thing that really blows my mind is when we were at the National Funeral Directors Association convention, the students coming up to us and thanking us for doing this, and they're learning a lot from it. And we had one student that said, they're in mortuary school because of the podcast. It's still hard for me to believe to this day. So, but my answer is maybe on that one.
Don't think we don't get heat either. We'll get some pushback too, because not everybody has an opinion, as we do, as anybody else does. So, we do get some heat pushed back on us, and that's fine. That's, it is what it is there.
When do you feel like the podcast has impacted your own personal businesses at all? Because we hear that from funeral directors all the time. I don't want to be on video. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to get heat. I don't want to get upset, but usually the good outweighs the bad. Has that been what you found?
I think it's, I wouldn't say it's done anything bad. Has it changed volume? Has it changed any time, calls or anything like that? Not necessarily. I think it's helped me do things differently within my facility because now I know there's different options out there. Mm-hmm. This is it's a podcast that's global. So I would say, if funeral homes wanted to start their own podcast, we've got friends locally that have done that and started their own, and it's just for that small community, or people doing Facebook Live videos, every week, things like that. I think that is beneficial. I think that helps, and I think it also brings that funeral director in more of a personal light to the public because they get to see your mannerisms, how you feel, how you act. So yeah, I that's where I would go with that.
Yeah, for me, I mean, not really, because we've been very careful to keep the podcast separate from our funeral homes. I mean, it's Ryan and I's hobby, and it's not a venture of the funeral home. So, because of the heat that we thought we might get, we really wanted to keep that away from our parents and our owners, because our hobby shouldn't bring them any heat. By talking to different companies, though, I mean, our horizons have expanded. And so we've definitely been able to bring the knowledge that we've gained on the podcast to, our operations. And it's always funny when we get a delivery person in, we start talking to them, they start to give us a look like, I know your voice. I was just listening to you.
Yeah.
And of course we laugh.
That's awesome.
So do you guys think you could talk, because obviously with the pandemic and everything, a lot of things have changed business-wise, and do you guys think you could talk about how the pandemic has impacted your businesses and how that's evolved over the course of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Ryan and I, we've been very lucky in our area of Indiana. I mean, we were just talking before we started recording here, our infection rate is about 0.003%. It's very, very low. And, we're very thankful.
Really
we did the lockdown. The community was very good staying home. But what it has done, and what I think it's a fair assumption to make nationwide, it has thrust funeral homes into the 21st century. I mean,
Yes.
If you haven't offered video, you got it now. If you can't do arrangements via webcast or using technology to do that where you're not face to face, you got to figure it out now. So I know there's a lot of funeral directors panicking at that time, and a lot of companies have stepped up to help us do that. So there's been a big change. I think it's going to be here for good. That this technology is there. We just, as funeral directors, we need to make sure we're comfortable with it, and we can still provide value in what we do just by using technology to enhance, our own personal brand as well as the funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything go ahead.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I'm not going to add anything to Brian because he pretty much took the whole thing. But I think, from a standpoint of if you're looking for types of technology that can, help you through these times and whatnot, or any type of mobile technology, check out a few of the episodes of Undertaking the podcast, because we've got one or two that, are with some of these companies that are it's just helpful.
So could you guys talk a bit about anything you've done that has been really helpful for your firms in specific since things have changed?
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I mean, for me, video production was always a part of my mind, but in my area of the world, it wasn't requested. And once this started hitting, I started getting prepared. I'm like, okay, I need to prepare myself to be able to do broadcasts, and for me personally, I chose to do a delayed broadcast, and that was just our taste here at the funeral home. So that was something that we had to get comfortable with real quick, and frankly, it wasn't very hard at all. But that was the main change for us. We were already starting to move with the technology before the pandemic hit, of being able to make arrangements mobily and at a distance. So that technology was already in place when the pandemic hit. So I was in a comfortable spot. I wasn't put behind the 8 ball there. But that's my experience. Right.
So then Brian, did you you started doing video? Are you shooting the video, editing the video, all of that on your own? Or are you just?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I'm recording the video myself, and I'm normally recording with 2 different devices from different angles. I'm also recording mobily, and then I don't know if I'm type A or what, but and then when I get it all done, I just kind of like the podcast. I try to overproduce it, I guess. I want it to look good. I want it to look nice. I don't want it to be fuzzy, and I want some transitions. So yeah, I do on my end. I get in there and kind of overproduce it a little bit.
And what editing software do you use for that?
Frankly, I used what was on my computer. The Microsoft Video is
Great.
real simple for someone of my technical expertise, which is not a lot. Although we can put a podcast out, it's just something that you got to work through. You got to learn it, and it was a real simple learning curve.
Gotcha. And Ryan, do you have anything you want to add about that?
Well, I mean, I think we're still on videos and whatnot. That's the biggest thing. We've been doing a lot of arrangements through iPhones, FaceTimes, things like that. So I can be in my arrangements room doing an arrangements and show people caskets if they want. But we've also, got the ability also through different merchandisers where you can send people a link, and they can also look at what I'm showing them in the arrangements room from their computer. Now, the challenge with that is not everybody that we serve has that technology at all. You've still got the flip phone era. You've still got a lot of different things there that you're dealing with. Sometimes it does depend on the other person and how, I guess how closely they've moved with technology or moved up in technology. But we do the videotapes. We hire that out. We bring to actually do that in videotapes. Did I just say videotapes?
You did.
We record. Can you believe that? We record funerals and whatnot upon request. That's not a problem. Honestly, we were doing that stuff before because people were requesting it. So it's not, in a rural community, it's becoming more and more, I would say, more grown within the IT and the technical field. They're very much wanting those options, and even in rural America, Brian and I are not from the city, you know what I mean? And these here understand the capabilities and whatnot now, especially with things that have gone on. I mean, it's crazy how we're doing this right now. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have ever thought about doing something like this, on the computer with people until COVID hit, and now, you're actually having conferences, there's you've got, the political entities within our area that do their council meetings, their commissioner meetings, everything is on Zoom. I think it helps with maybe transparency and whatever else, but I think people are very much realizing quickly that they have to step up into this technology era.
Yeah, I think funeral directors and the public at large, both, everybody.
Yep.
So I think you guys are in a really unique position as both funeral directors and podcasters to kind of see trends that might be coming in the industry, or maybe have some insight into things that you think are you expect to see. Is there anything you want to say, like you think this is going to be a new trend, or you something that surprised you that's coming down the pike?
It's really hard. The country is so big, and I think things are regional, really. I mean, as we've traveled around, we find that funeral service can be completely different the way the public interacts with a funeral home and a funeral director, and even their own community. I mean, we're in a community where if there's a visitation, people are going to come. They're going to come. They want a hug. They're going to bring a pie. And, we went out west, and it was like, you have a visitation, and, especially if there's a body in the building, good luck. So
it was that was a very interesting dynamic, Brian. Out west, it's very much different.
Yeah, I really think the trends are technology. It's going to be how can we use technology to make the experience a little, as far as the business end, let's keep the grief where the grief needs to be, and not on the tasks of planning this and getting this together, and maybe just being bogged down by, just the tasks of putting a service together. So I really think technology is going to be here to stay, and it's going to be interesting to see regionally how that's used.
Mhm.
I think it's different everywhere. Brian commented on our travels. I mean, we've had the opportunity to go to a lot of different places, and it's just different. The Midwest is different than the West Coast. We went to Washington, completely different type of funeral service, completely different type of ritual, tradition, whatever you want to call it. East Coast, it's completely different than what we do. So people say that the Midwest or the inner part of the United States is always the last to kind of, move with change, but it's been pretty consistent here when it comes to the traditional ritual of a funeral service. Some areas of the country, like Brian, they're not comfortable necessarily having the decedent there, and they just want the service and then they go from there. Where we're at, I mean, people ask why, that's a question. If it's a direct cremation or something like that, and it's just a memorial service, people ask why, and it's just preference of the family. But here in the Midwest, it's still fairly traditional, I would say.
Interesting.
That is interesting. And I grew up, I told Brian this the other day on the phone, but I grew up in Oxford, where Miami is, Miami of Ohio. So when I moved out here to Colorado, it was a big adjustment for me in terms of that lack of personal connection, or, in the Midwest, everybody knows everything about everybody, and that is not the way here, and you're not supposed to be that way. So I've seen that difference both in our social interactions, but also in the way that I've seen people celebrate a life between those two places. So
I love Colorado.
Yes,
Colorado.
I love Colorado. I do too. But I miss things about the Midwest too. The Midwest has wonderful things about it. It is different. It is. Joey, do you want to ask that last question?
Yeah, so this is a question we like to ask everybody. So what's the most important thing you've learned serving in the funeral industry?
I think it reinforced it for me. I think death really reinforces that life matters, all life matters, and that we need to love and care for each other. And I think we need to be mindful of how we interact, even behind a keyboard, because words have consequences, and I think words can absolutely uplift a family, or it can absolutely destroy someone. So I think death has just reinforced the importance of people and the importance of having people around you when you're grieving. And that's a message that I try to put out in the community, that, when you see an obituary, that is a personal invitation for you to come and support a family. And I encourage you to do that.
I love that.
I would say just being more open-minded. Funeral service, and with all the changes we've had here within the past 3 months because of the pandemic, I think that we've had to maybe get out of our comfort zone. Some of us have already moved past that, but some of us had to get out of our comfort zone to just move with the times. I think also dialogue for me has been big, narrative, actually having those conversations, those tough conversations. I truly believe if we're not talking, we're not getting better at anything. And, I'm not a big fan of shutting people down necessarily at all. I mean, I like to have the back and forth, and the podcast for us really, really helps with that. But I think it also helps me too, when I sit with a family and try to put a service together for them, to be able to ask the right questions. I can always go back to something that we've talked about and use it within that arrangements conference.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think your podcast does a really good job of reinforcing those ideas, probably for your listeners as well. So I think that's great. So thank you so much, Brian and Ryan. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us this week on Funeral Innovations, Trends, Tips, and Technology. We'll be posting this video on our blog, our YouTube channels, our Facebook, so you'll be able to access it all there. And feel free to check back next week with another show. If you have any topics you'd like to see discussed, or someone you'd like to hear from in an interview, add it in the comments down below. And be sure to visit our website at funeralinnovations.com. Have a great day. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks so much, you guys. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it.